Imagine spending your entire adult life building something original. Not popular, original. The kind of music that makes people scratch their heads, that critics struggle to categorize, that your own country doesn't quite know what to do with. Imagine being part of one of the most important cultural movements of the 20th century and still being left out of the story when people write it down. Imagine deciding in your 50s that it's over, that you missed your window, that you should probably go back home, back to your cousin's place and forget about the music. That was Tom Z in 1989. And then a man from New York walked into a Brazilian record store, picked up an album and changed everything. This is one of the most improbable comeback stories in music history, and almost nobody outside Brazil has ever heard it properly told. Before we go further, Brazilian music is one of the most layered, genre-spanning, historically rich music scenes that exists anywhere on Earth. From Tropicalia to Bossa Nova, from samba to Bahian experimentalism, Brazilian artists have been quietly shaping the sound of the world for over a century. I've spent years going deep into this universe. If that sounds like your kind of rabbit hole, hit subscribe before this video ends, and let's keep going together. Tom Z was born in 1936 in Irará, a small city in the interior of Bahia. He grew up in a place where the northeast of Brazil met everything: the rhythms of African-rooted music, the Catholic liturgies, the dry sertão heat, the music that came up from the streets and out of church doorways. From early on, he was drawn not just to playing music, but to thinking about what music could be. He went to Salvador to study. He enrolled at the Federal University of Bahia, where he studied composition and music theory under an Austrian-born conductor named Hans Joachim Kohlreuter, a man who had fled Nazi Germany, arrived in Brazil, and proceeded to teach a generation of young Brazilians that everything they knew about music could be taken apart and rebuilt. Tom Z absorbed all of it: the theory, the technique, the permission to be strange. He carried that strangeness back into the streets. In 1968, he arrived in Sao Paulo. And Sao Paulo in 1968 was one of the most electric places in the world, at least if you knew where to look. That was the year of Tropicalia. Caetano, Veloso, and Gilberto had assembled a loose, brilliant, deliberately provocative movement that was trying to detonate Brazilian culture from the inside out. They were taking Beatles harmonies and psychedelic rock textures and smashing them against samba rhythms and northeastern folk music and absurdist poetry. They wanted something that could absorb everything: foreign and domestic, modern and ancient, electric and acoustic, and come out the other side as something Brazil had never heard. Tom Z was there. He performed at the same TV festivals. He recorded on the landmark Tropicalia album, the one that gave the movement its name. His voice, his ideas, his specifically Bahian weirdness was threaded through the whole thing. But from the beginning, there was something about Tom Z that even the other Tropicalistas found difficult to pin down. He was more extreme, more abstract, more interested in questions that the songs themselves couldn't quite answer. While Caetano and Gil wrote things that were strange but still accessible, songs that could be hummed, lyrics that could be quoted, Tom Z was writing music that asked you to meet it somewhere uncomfortably far from the center. Brazil in the early 1970s was not ready for that. The military dictatorship had tightened its grip after 1968. Caetano and Gil were arrested, then exiled, then gradually returned to a country trying to forget the worst years. The cultural atmosphere was one of suppression and wariness. Music that made people think too hard was not what record labels wanted to sell. Tom Z kept recording anyway. He released albums throughout the 1970s. Todos os Olhos in 1973, Estudando Samba in 1976, Correio da Estação do Brás in 1978. Each one was more carefully constructed and less commercially viable than the last. Estudando Samba, Studying Samba, was the most extreme of all. It was an album that took one of Brazil's most beloved musical forms and disassembled it piece by piece, examining its structure the way an engineer examines a machine, then putting it back together in configurations that samba had never occupied. Critics who discovered it decades later called it a landmark, a work of startling conceptual ambition that should have been recognized as one of the great Brazilian albums of its era. In 1976, almost nobody bought it. By the early 1980s, Tom Zé's commercial career had effectively collapsed. He was still making music, still performing, but without an audience, without a label willing to back him, without any clear sense that what he was doing was connecting with anyone. The years passed. The 1980s were a decade of rock in Brazil. Os Paralamas do Sucesso, Legião Urbana, RPM, the wave of pop rock that swept a generation. Tom Zé was not part of any of that. He was somewhere else entirely, getting quieter. By the late 1980s, he was approaching the decision. Not a dramatic one, not a single moment, but a slow reckoning with the reality that the music wasn't working. His cousin had a gas station in Irará, back in Bahia. That was a possibility. That was where this could end. And then David Byrne walked into a record store. Byrne, the lead singer and creative engine of Talking Heads, had spent the 1980s expanding his sense of what popular music could be. The Talking Heads record Remain in Light, with its dense Afrobeat rhythms and Brian Eno productions, had opened something up in how Byrne heard the world. He started listening differently. He started paying attention to music from places American radio had never considered, from West Africa, from Latin America, from Brazil. In the late 1980s, Byrne was in Brazil. He walked into a record store, somewhere in Sao Paulo or Rio, the accounts differ, and he started flipping through the racks. He pulled out a copy of Estudando o Samba. He listened, and he heard something that stopped him. He heard an artist who had been doing something radically original for over a decade, in a language nobody outside Brazil spoke, with a sensibility that had no real equivalent anywhere in the world. He heard beauty in strange places, his own phrase, used in the liner notes he would write a year later. He heard a musician who had refused to simplify himself even when the world stopped paying attention. Byrne had founded a record label in 1988. He called it Luaka Bop. The name was deliberately absurd, Byrne explaining it as a kind of nonsense phrase that sounded like it could mean something. The label's mission was to bring music from outside the Anglo-American mainstream to an audience that might not know it existed. By 1990, the label had already released compilations of Brazilian music. Now Byrne had something different in mind. In 1990, Luaka Bop released Brazil Classics 4, the best of Tom Zé, massive hits. The title was deliberately ironic. These were not massive hits. Some of them had never charted anywhere. Byrne didn't care. He wrote liner notes that were part criticism, part manifesto, part love letter to an artist the world had overlooked. Mass popularity has eluded him, Byrne wrote, because he continues relentlessly to push and expand the boundaries. He described Tom Zé as someone who found beauty in strange places, who built music from materials that most composers wouldn't even consider, who refused to make things easier for the listener, even when making them easier would have changed his life. The record came out. Tom Zé was 53 years old, and the world paid attention. European promoters called. American music critics wrote about him. Festivals invited him. He toured the United States. He toured Europe. He played for audiences who had never heard of him, but who sat in the dark listening with the focused attention that only appears when something genuinely new arrives in the room. Tom Zé gave interviews. He performed. He explained his ideas with the energy of someone who had been waiting decades for someone to ask. And then he did something that lesser artists would not have done. He didn't try to replicate what Byrne had found. He didn't make Estudando o Samba Part 2, cashing in on the rediscovery. He kept moving forward. The albums that followed, Jogos de Amar in 1992, The Hips of Tradition in 1992, Como Defeito de Fabricação in 1998, Estudando o Pagode in 2005, were each stranger than the last, each more insistently themselves. Critics who expected a nostalgia act found instead an artist who was accelerating. Beck cited him. Café Tacuba cited him. An entire generation of musicians who made music that didn't fit the standard categories pointed at Tom Zé and said, "That's what we're trying to do." He never stopped. He is one of the longest-running, most consistently original careers in Brazilian music. 60 years of work that refused, in every decade, to become what the market wanted it to be. He started in the avant-garde and stayed there, even when it cost him everything. And because he stayed there, when someone finally came looking, there was something extraordinary to find. The story of Tom Zé and David Byrne is not just a story about one musician's rescue. It's a story about what happens to art that refuses to compromise, how it can disappear for years, exist in a state of near silence, and still survive, intact and whole, waiting for someone who knows how to hear it. Byrne didn't save Tom Zé. He just showed the rest of us where to look. If that thought stays with you, if Tom Zé is a name you're going to carry forward now, every episode of this channel is another door into Brazilian music that most of the world has never opened. The stories go deep. Click on the video on your screen right now and let's keep going.